Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is in Marvel I Am God. Were Endless transmigrated the timeline of Wolverine 3 and became the last mutant of the old era. At the moment, the X-Men have long since disbanded, Mutant is no longer brilliant, Wolverine is entering old age, and the entire race is in peril. Fortunately, he found that when he watched battles he could obtain the opponent's abilities. So let's start this story, relax and enjoy. At the moment, in Gotham City, where high-rise buildings are lined up, the heavy clouds above have never dissipated, and the air is always filled with the smell of kerosene, and the city sinks into darkness as the scorching sun falls. The streets of Gotham have returned home one after another. Especially the streets of the slums have long been empty, and in this heavily divided city, many people cannot even guarantee their lives, and they live in the lower strata to survive. The most intuitive feeling is to stand on a high place overlooking the city, half dark and half bright. Endless is now standing on the tower of the slum, looking around the slum. Gotham really coexists with heaven and hell. His tone was emotional. After the convenience store closed tonight, he saw that the time was still early to teleport to DC Gotham through the dimension, and he was naturally interested in the world of the same American comic giant. What's more, compared to the ability that Marvel can get here, it is obviously more powerful. Simply take Marvel 199999 as an example. He currently has no access to high-dimensional existence, and there is a bug in the DC world, that is, Superman Clark Kent's power, more accessible. But finding Clark is not an easy task, and Metropolis is one of the largest cities in America, and finding someone in all of Met's universities is obviously difficult. Unless, like a professor, you have the ability of the mind. Finding a target through telepathy makes it easier. It's just that Endless has not met the professor yet, and Clark's affairs can only be done later. Bang! At this moment, Endless was keenly aware of a sound of cursing and fighting in the alley not far away. Although he didn't get Wolverine's physical ability, originally is mutant, and all aspects of his body are originally different, which is why he punched Batman. He followed the sound and ran towards the alley, and after a while he saw the situation in the alley. I saw that a figure dressed in all black was fighting with two robbers, and there was a mother and daughter huddled in a corner in horror next to them. Obviously they were the object of robbery. Gotham never sympathized with the weak, and the survival of the fittest was vividly reflected in the city. Looking at the man in black again, he is a fledgling Batman. His clothes are thicker than last night, and the weapons he carries around his waist are richer. The two robbers on the opposite side were not opponents at all, and a few raw sucks were knocked to the ground. The two lay on the ground with hideous faces and groaned in pain. One of them had his hand broken at one point. It seems that Batman will not kill, but he will never be merciful to criminals, and directly beat them to cripple. You're safe, Bruce. Wayne turned his head and said to the mother and daughter who were curled up in the corner. Thank you. The mother and daughter walked out in fear, and they hugged each other and thanked each other. Bruce standing opposite. Wayne looked at their shabby coats, his eyes showing mixed emotions, and he thought about taking some USD out of his pocket and handing it to the emaciated mother. This is for you. However, the thin mother did not answer, but directly chose to take her daughter to turn around and leave, and her eyebrows revealed fear. Bruce. Wayne tugged at the dollar bill in his hand, not understanding why the other party was afraid of him, and they didn't even dare to take the money in his hand. When he was out of his mind, there was a landing sound behind him, followed by a familiar and unfamiliar voice. Big young master, go home, this place is not for you. It's you. Bruce Wayne will not forget when he dies. He remembers the owner of the voice vividly, and turns his head to see that it is indeed the yellow-skinned boy from last night. He said coldly, "You smuggled in from the east. I didn't find any files about you. It's ridiculous, there are so many people in this city that they can't count on their hands. Sir, do you really know Gotham?" Endless is very interested in the role of Batman, who is one of the few characters in the American comic world with great personal charm. If it were to be the Master more than 10 years later, he would probably not be able to play. But the Master is just a rookie who is getting started, and he naturally has to get along with him when he has the opportunity. "What the hell do you mean?" Bruce Wayne calmed down and didn't act agitated anymore. He thought he should listen to what the yellow-skinned boy in front of him said. Maybe as a fool said, there are people who know Gotham better than him. If you had given the dollar to the mother and daughter just now, if you were lucky, you might see tomorrow, an orphan who lost his mother, or 2 corpses dumped in a smelly gutter. Endless' tone was indifferent, but the content sounded extremely cold. Hearing this, the young Bruce Wayne was stunned and felt absurd. Just for those USD. Will they take 2 lives? Because this is Gotham. Endless has seen the Gotham depicted in the comics, and the missing people can usually be found in some stinking gutter, and similar things happen every day. No one cares if they live or die. Who the hell are you? Bruce Wayne was completely stunned when he heard this. He left Gotham for 10 years, and he still came back young and vigorous. On the surface, he is a volunteer police officer to punish ***** and eliminate evil, but in fact, he is also looking for the murderer who shot his parents back then. Looking at it now, his mind seems to be inferior to that of a 17 or 18-year-old boy. And the psychology or skill shown by the other party are far beyond his expectations. It's not like a teenager at all. He was curious about the identity of this guy. However, as soon as at the moment finished asking this sentence, there were hurried footsteps at both ends of the alley, and then I saw a group of people with firearms surrounding the alley. Their eyes were locked on the 2 in the alley. It seems that there are many bad lucks. Endless was a little surprised. He didn't expect to be targeted after only a while. He turned his head to look at Bruce and wondered, "Have you provoked anyone recently?" "I'm investigating a missing person, and there were people who came into contact with them the day before yesterday." Bruce Wayne swept the sides and said in a deep voice, "Wait a while, I'll take you away. The enemy is too numerous to their advantage." Although he hated this yellow-skinned boy in his heart, it was one thing and another, and he couldn't let the other party stay here and wait for death. "Don't be nervous, they're the ones leaving." Endless looked calm. Bullets could not kill him at all. "Perhaps, but they can have guns in their hands." Bruce Wayne was speechless. He didn't know what this guy was going to do, but as long as it wasn't too crazy. It's just that. Apparently Bruce has been away from Gotham for 10 years and has not been able to readjust to this crazy city, and tonight he will meet a crazy man. The dark alleys shrouded in night are gloomy and dark, the damp floors are messy, and the garbage is piled up due to moisture and corrosion, forming a dirty and disgusting picture. Tonight. Unknown alleys, but exceptionally lively. Click. The sound of metal friction and collision echoes in the dead atmosphere but extremely strange space. Endless raised his eyebrows slightly, and looked at Bruce with a smile, and saw a thick worry in the other party's eyes. Apparently, they all understood that it was the sound of a bullet loading. And such a sound shows one thing. There is not much time left for them to make small talk. At this time, the noisy footsteps at both ends of the alley did not stop, but were approaching their position. Compared with the previous hurried steps, it is now calm. After all, both ends of the alley have been completely blocked, and there is no leakage in the air, and no one will believe that the trapped duo can escape. The group of villains with firearms kept approaching, and finally stopped at a relatively safe distance, a pair of fierce eyes staring at the figure in the middle of the alley. In the past few days, they have all heard that the nominal police officer who has appeared recently is very skillful. Because of this, these villains showed two completely different emotions when they looked at Bruce. Half is abomination, while the other half is guarded. In the dim and humid environment, the atmosphere began to become solemn, and everyone couldn't help but hold their breath. A man resembling a small boss walked out of the crowd and stared at Bruce dressed in black. Wayne hated to the point of itching his teeth. The night before, his men were sent to the police station by the recently rumored vigilantes. Not only that, but there is also a den that is almost exposed. Almost caused a huge loss. This made him hate the nominal policeman to the bone, and it was bound to eradicate the other party and make the latter understand that the most real Gotham is not for anyone to come here as a hero. So he ordered people to pay attention to the traces of the policeman. Finally, tonight, an informant brought news. That's why he rushed people over in a hurry, wanting to get rid of them quickly. The little boss glared at Bruce and said in a solemn tone, "Gotham never needs heroes, boy, you've come to the wrong place." Bruce looked indifferent and responded coldly, "Unfortunately, I think this city needs a hero to save her from fire and water." Then he lowered his voice and said to Endless beside him, "There are too many of them, we have to retreat first." In his heart, this fledgling rich young master was obviously not as calm as he seemed, and it was the first time he had encountered a situation like now. Not at all as calm as Batman later. "Don't worry too much, rich kid." Endless shrugged his shoulders, looking disapproving. "It doesn't matter if there are many people, he has a super self-healing factor. Unless someone can completely destroy his physical body, he may wake up. Shoot me, don't let them go." The little leader looked at the appearance of the two whispering, deeply felt the other party's insult, and a fire suddenly rose in his heart. He raised his hand and beckoned, and a group of subordinates agreed, and then jerked the trigger in their hands. Da-da-da. In an instant, a burst of fire flickered, and endless firelight filled the entire alley. The gangsters in Gotham City kill people without blinking, not to mention that the other party touched their bottom line. Naturally no one was soft-hearted, and the cold muzzle in his hand also became hot due to the bullets fired. Seeing this, Bruce Wayne secretly cursed in his heart, "Damn." Even if such an offensive caught him off guard, his years of training had already allowed his reaction to reach the peak level of human beings, so he had no intention of slowing down in the face of the surging offensive reaction. The moment the little boss was about to give the order, Bruce's arm had already shot out a rope and plunged straight into the wall. He wanted to grab Endless next to him to dodge together, but he didn't expect to catch an empty one. Just when he was surprised, his feet were already off the ground before he could react, and the whole person was pulled upstairs by his own rope. Bang! Then when he stood upstairs, his eyes quickly caught Endless' figure in the narrow alley. At the moment, Endless was still standing on the ground, countless bullets directly through his body. Under such fierce fire, Endless couldn't hold on for even a moment, and fell straight to the ground and passed out completely. Damn! Bruce Wayne looked at the scene below and felt a strong guilt in his heart. Although he hated this inexplicable teenager, the other party was implicated because of himself, resulting in the loss of his life. When the fire from the muzzle dissipated, gun smoke filled the entire alley. The little leader stepped forward, kicked the corpse lying on the ground with his toes, turned it over, and frowned slightly when he found that it was not Batman. Kill the wrong person. But Gotham's death is a commonplace thing, no big deal. Anyway, there are so many people who died at his hands, one more is not much, one less is not much. It's just a pity that I didn't kill the nominal policeman with me. Thinking of this, the little leader took a mouthful of sticky spit with a look of disgust, and cursed viciously in his mouth, "You deserve it, stay with a vigilante, and die more than enough." Immediately after, he raised his head and glanced up slightly, just in time to meet Bruce's cold gaze. The little boss could feel the anger under Batman's eyes, and seeing this, he was even more proud, and said with a sly smile, "Shoot that damn guy down for me." The voice fell. His men immediately made a move, aiming their guns upstairs in unison. Then the muzzle of the black hole was aimed at the black figure that appeared a little blurry in the dim light. Without saying a word, they suddenly pulled the trigger, and countless bullets shot out. In the dim alley, the gunfire once again erupted into a dazzling light. Successive constantly shots made the muzzle slightly red due to the high temperature. In the face of such fierce fire suppression, Bruce's body is extremely agile, like a ghost, tossing and turning in a narrow environment, constantly moving between cover. As for the rich night, it turned into his best protective color. Soon many people lost their goals and vented their gunfire in their hands in the face of empty places. Scorching bullets hit the wall, shattering the otherwise flat masonry walls, leaving craters of varying shades. Some also landed on railings and other metal objects, making a ding sound and blooming dazzling sparks. The continuous sound of constant gunshots directly broke the night that should have been calm. But in Gotham City, calm doesn't mean tranquility. Whether quiet or noisy, in every corner where dirt is hidden, how shocking things can happen. As for tonight's firefight, it is staged all the time. Rao is accustomed to the citizens living nearby, and no one will call the police. Because when there is a problem with a system, and often the biggest problem is the ruler at the top. Chaos, squalor, betrayal, turmoil. This is Gotham. The light emitted by the gunfire is still dazzling, and the crazy mood of the crowd is still intense. At this moment, no one noticed a thing. The yellow-skinned boy who fell before, his eyelashes touched slightly, and then he opened his eyes sharply. Endless frowned slightly and stood up slowly on the ground. The soreness on his body made him feel a little uncomfortable. In the endless gunfire, such a faint movement seemed weak and inaudible. But the figure that stood up in the dark quickly attracted the attention of the people around them, and everyone noticed the movement and looked back at the brows, and couldn't help but be a little puzzled when they saw the blurry figure. There. When are there more people? Soon someone saw the foreground clearly with the help of light, and his face gradually became terrified, and he shouted, "It's that guy just now, he didn't die." This startled roar instantly woke up everyone, and the sense of fear spread rapidly in the crowd, and the expressions on their faces suddenly froze. The gangsters released their fingers that were pulling the trigger and stared at the incredulous scene in front of them with wide eyes. They all knew very well that under such fierce fire, even a cow could not stop the rush of bullets, let alone a thin teenager. Unless the yellow-skinned boy is not a human at all, and only the demons that exist in legends can bring them back from the dead. Everyone's expressions froze and stiffened, almost subconsciously holding raw and sucking, their slightly constricted pupils full of shock. Time. In the dim alley, there was a dead silence. The reddish muzzle, the shell casings on the ground, the smoke of gunfire. Taking the strange atmosphere a step further, The death-like solemnity of this moment quietly shrouded everyone's heads, and it was the fear of suffocating in the face of unknown creatures. The little boss swallowed his spit with difficulty, and his voice began to tremble slightly as he was oppressed by fear. My God! The person who should have died was standing alive in front of him, but he had seen the bullet penetrate the opponent's body before, and the other party was covered in blood holes. Although there are many crazy people in Gotham City, he is the first time to see a person who has come back from the dead. The little boss swallowed, his lips slightly open, and squeezed out a sentence, "What the hell are you, monster?" Hearing these words, all the subordinates next to him also came to their senses, and pointed their guns at Endless in unison. What they learned in Gotham survival is that everything can be solved with the barrel of a gun in the face of the unknown. At the same time, Bruce stood on the roof of the building next to the alley. Wayne, naturally, also noticed the movement below. He poked his head out of the bunker and looked cautiously at the scene below. When he saw Endless, who had already got up, Bruce's pupils shrank suddenly, and his tone revealed a strong disbelief. How could it be? At the moment Endless' appearance is very terrifying. I am afraid that whoever sees it will feel very terrifying. Although the alley is very dark, the strong smell of blood cannot be fake. Through the weak light, it is not difficult to see that his body is covered with red blood holes, and he cannot find any intact place. Even his left face has been smashed in half, and the flesh and blood turned out are extremely hideous. But at the moment of Endless, he's laughing. Under the pool of the muscles, the wound on the face became even more terrifying. However, in the next second, these blood holes that were almost all over the body began to heal rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the muscle contraction and relaxation, one warhead after another is expelled from the body, and the warhead falls to the ground, reflecting the unique luster of metal. After landing on the ground, it bounced up slightly, emitting a crisp sound. Endless stretched out his palm, touched the skin that had recovered intact, and sneered, "Ha! This is the self-healing factor in the body that plays a role. As long as the physical body is not completely destroyed, theoretically, he can still come back from the dead in extreme environments. The previous death was just a sleep. Just being able to self-heal does not mean losing the pain, and the sharp pain of the bullet penetrating the body will not dissipate, and even because there is no death, the pain of the blood hole on the body is always accompanied." Endless anger welled up in his heart, and he looked at the gangster as if he were looking at a group of dead men. Bruce on the roof of the building witnessed all this, felt that the world view he had cultivated over the years had been completely destroyed, and had seen many crazy people in Gotham for many years, but he had never seen anything like Endless. In Gotham City. Sure enough, only madmen and normal people. "What the hell are you?" the little boss questioned again. His trembling voice and frightened tone exposed the fear in his heart, feeling the coldness in the other party's eyes, and a faint creepy in his heart. "You haven't seen more?" Endless sneered in response, leaned over and picked up the dagger that Bruce had dropped from the fight before, and the dagger with a cold light flew flexibly between his fingers, like a flexible silverfish. The young man played with the dagger and walked in the direction where the little boss was. His pace was very leisurely. The little boss had seen Endless' inhuman ability, and his heart had long been filled with fear, and he subconsciously took a few steps backwards as he watched the approaching Endless. Before the battle, it declined, and the momentum alone has already been instigated. The little boss couldn't suppress the fear in his heart, and roared with a distorted face, "Shoot! Kill him for me!" Seeing this, the surrounding subordinates pulled the trigger without hesitation. In an instant, huge amounts of gunshots rang out again, echoing over Gotham City, but these bullets obviously could not stop Endless' footsteps. In the flickering firelight, Endless bent his knees slightly, and his feet suddenly burst out of huge amounts of power, directly facing the gunfire and killing towards the crowd. He is originally mutant, with physical qualities beyond normal. Coupled with the top-level fighting skills he has previously acquired, his control of the situation allows him to use the favorable terrain around him very flexibly, constantly shuttling through the crowd to dodge incoming bullets. Bruce's dagger, the guns of the gangsters, and the shattered bricks on the ground. As long as it can be touched, all of them are turned into deadly weapons in his hands. With just one look, he had already killed several people who stood in his way, and hot blood spilled to the ground, mixing the fishy smell with gun smoke, turning into a disgusting complex gas. At the moment in the alley, several bodies have fallen. Their hideous pupils were constricted, as if they had experienced great fear during their lives. Eventually, Endless rushed straight to the little boss. In the frightened eyes of the other party, Endless' hand rose and fell, his movements were extremely fast, and the cold blade pierced into the neck of the little boss. Immediately after, the arm took the wrist and burst out of the huge amount of power, causing the dagger to slash in a circle, and blood bloomed in the night, emitting a cruel fragrance. Endless grabbed the little boss's hair and jerked it upwards. A bloody head, just held in your hand. The rest of the people looked at the scene in front of them in horror and immediately realized that they were not a person at all, but monster. The gun that used to be held in his hand is the truth, but now the bullets can't stop this monster's footsteps. Forced by strong fear, the surviving gang members fled in all directions due to fear, and the firearms in their hands were also thrown on the ground, for fear that the monster behind them would target them. Then, Bruce upstairs. Wayne slid down the rope to the ground. He had just stood on the roof of the building and witnessed everything. The other party not only had the world's top fighting ability. Even with a near-immortal body, in the past, such people would only appear in Norse mythology, which was a god. He took a deep breath and looked at the body all over the place, and said with a solemn face, "Who are you?" Endless glanced at Bruce faintly and said something that made his heart tighten. "Don't be nervous, Bruce." Suddenly, the air solidified again. The dim and damp alley fell into an eerie silence again. Bruce's face suddenly became solemn when he heard his name, and his originally calm heart suddenly sank, and even his heartbeat couldn't help but speed up a little. He looked at Endless with his brows locked, his eyes showing vigilance in his mask. The fact that this teenager in front of him, who had never met before, actually knew himself, which made Bruce Wayne feel panicked in his heart. His identity as Batman is known only to the butler of Fu. Bruce Wayne took a deep breath to pretend to be calm, and asked abruptly, "What are you talking about?" Although he has tried his best to control it, his voice is still a little muffled through the diacritics. Endless saw what Bruce was thinking, smiled and replied, "I'm not interested in hurting you. If I had done that, you would have died last night." Bruce Wayne's eyes narrowed slightly, the light under his eyes flickered, and his hands couldn't help but shake them, and the picture of the teenager's previous death and resurrection began to appear in his mind, which could not be dispersed for a long time. He didn't want to admit it on his lips, but he knew in his heart that if the other party really wanted to kill him, he would indeed be unable to escape. Superb fighting skills, incredible tenacity. Bruce looked at the boy who behaved strangely, and after a moment of silence, he said, "You won't find me for no reason." He had experienced tonight's events and felt a little less disgusted with Endless. The two are seriously inconsistent in the concept of implementing justice, but it is always a good thing to have a companion who punishes ***** and evil together in the cold and dirty city of Gotham. Moreover, from endless expression and words, he felt that he was not a heinous person, but what he did was for Gotham. It's just a solution to things, it's just too extreme. Endless was slightly startled when he heard this, and his head thought for a moment. In fact, he really had no intentions, and these two encounters could be regarded as accidental, although he admired the charismatic Batman, but he would not bother so much for Batman. After all, he came here for superheroes' ability and to improve his strength in the American comic world. Here Bruce though. Endless thought about it for a moment, and then said smoothly, I want you to help find someone. Hearsay? Bruce asked, who? Clark Kent, I want his archives. Endless did not hesitation responded, and the person he most wanted to find at the moment was naturally Superman Clark Kent. Hearing this name, Bruce hesitated for a moment. He had never heard of this name in high society. Could it be that the other party is so painstaking, just to find a nobody? In this case, it is not difficult to do. It's just that Bruce is not a great benevolent person. Even if he is young, he will never make a loss-making transaction, not to mention that he is the heir of the capitalist Wayne Group. Why should I help you? Thinking, he retracted his thoughts and said, I know who killed the Waynes. Endless had long expected his words. No matter how young the old man is, there is the blood of capitalists flowing in his genes after all, and he will definitely not make a loss-making transaction. In the previous life, he had read the original manga, so he knew the identity of the killer. Even if the universe is different, there will always be commonalities, and this alone is enough to be used as a bargaining chip. And Endless believes that by throwing such bait, Bruce will not be hooked. Sure enough, Endless' faint words directly set off a terrifying wave in Bruce's heart. Bruce's face suddenly stiffened, and his pupils contracted to the extreme because of his undulating state of mind. His hands couldn't help but clench into fists, and his entire body was trembling slightly. He will never forget the gunshots that night. Over the years, it was like a nightmare, lingering in my mind. Bruce practiced hard for 10 years, and then returned to Gotham in order to find the murderer of the year. Now a teenager said that he knew the truth, and Bruce was excited but also a little hesitant, not knowing whether he should believe the other party. Bruce gasped heavily, also trying to calm himself. Is everything you said true? Endless shrugged his shoulders and said, definitely, it's just to help me find someone, and I don't need to lie to you with this kind of thing. Bruce glanced at the other party deeply, and the guard in his heart increased a little. This yellow-skinned boy really knows too much. But Bruce vaguely hoped that what the other party said could be true, and the teenager's terrifying self-healing ability also made him a little curious. In the future, if there is a chance, perhaps he can take the opportunity to study it. It may be possible to crack the genetic code in the teenager's body and use this to improve their physical fitness. In the end, Bruce compromised, nodded slowly, and said, I promise to help you. Endless hooked the corners of his mouth and stretched out his hand to Bruce, then wish us a happy cooperation. Bruce stared at Endless' outstretched palm, shook it after hesitating, and said in a low tone, if you dare to deceive me, I will definitely make you pay. Bruce said as he increased the force in his hand. Endless raised his eyebrows and began to exert force, but there was still a harmless smile on his face. How come? Our dark night. Bruce snorted coldly, and then released his palm. I will collect information as soon as possible. A rope shot from the arm and embedded in the wall above. After hesitating for a moment, Bruce said to Endless, "You should know how to find me." After that, Bruce's pitch-black figure swept upwards and soon disappeared into the night. After he left, Endless' mood seemed quite good, and after leisurely opening the portal, he finally disappeared into the night. A moment later, a rapid siren cut through the night sky, and a large group of police cars arrived. As soon as Inspector Gordon got out of the car, he smelled the strong smell of blood in the air, and his mood instantly fell to the bottom, and he hurried into the alley. The scene that greeted the eyes was like purgatory, with corpses lying on the dark and damp floor, and some internal organs spilled to the ground, and all the accompanying police officers had gastric juices rushing to their throats. Inspector Gordon covered his mouth and nose, and the strong work ethic prompted him to take a closer look. From those decedent wounds, it is clear that they are all from the hands of one person. Can you kill a group of gangsters armed with guns by yourself? Is it Batman? No way, he promised never to kill anyone. Inspector Gordon's brows furrowed in shock at the same time. He also felt a strong fear creep up in his heart. Meanwhile, Marvel World. Endless had returned to his original room and fell asleep on the soft bed. The sky outside the window shone brightly with the passage of time, and the night passed quickly. At the moment, Logan, who is on the Mexican border, drove away just after dawn and rushed directly to pick up people at the place agreed with the Mexican woman yesterday. This list is related to whether he and the professor can go to sea. Logan Hawley still values it, otherwise he would not take such a big risk to do it. However, when he arrived at the agreed place, he found that there was a dead silence around him. With beast-like instincts, he immediately felt a hint of foreboding, and when he carefully pushed the door open, he found Galaraf sitting in a chair. There was a strange smell in the air, and Logan frowned slightly and tried to shout a few times, "Gorlilith! I'm here to pick up people, move quickly." Unexpectedly, there was no response. Logan's eyes narrowed slightly, and when he got closer, he found that there was no anger in the other party's wide eyes, and there was a bullet hole left by a bullet on his forehead. Seeing this, his scalp suddenly tingled in his heart, and he realized that the situation was not good, quickly turned around and left, and drove back to his place of residence on the Mexican border. Something is going to happen. This list did not reap the benefits, but caused a commotion, and even the plan to leave had to be advanced. Logan, who was sitting in the driver's seat, felt extremely irritated about the upcoming life of escape, slammed the steering wheel and cursed, "Fuck." But he didn't notice that there was a slight tremor in the trunk. It seems like something is hiding inside. New Mexico border. The black Chrysler galloped on the endless desert road, and the cold wind pouring in through the window did not calm the anger in Logan's heart. He looked at the desert that was constantly swept backwards on both sides of the road, and a strong anxiety and uneasiness rose in his heart. "I hope nothing goes wrong," Logan muttered to himself in a gloomy tone, slamming the throttle on Chrysler and ejecting it. With the sound of the harsh brakes, the vehicle stopped sharply and raised bursts of yellow sand, filling the surrounding space. He didn't care at all, pushed the open door and walked down, slammed the door with a shake of his hand. Boom! Caliban in the factory noticed the movement, but also smelled the sense of crisis, and walked out to meet Logan's figure. The other party came in a hurry. Seeing this, Caliban asked with a smile, "Logan." "What?" Logan answered without looking back and continued to walk towards the factory building. "What's wrong with you? What's going on?" Caliban frowned and followed suit. "I shouldn't have taken it, this single start was a mistake." Logan walked towards the dimly lit room, his brows furrowed in a gloomy tone, then paused in his steps, and said to Caliban again, "You get ready, let's get out of this damn place later." When Caliban heard this, he was slightly startled and realized the seriousness of the matter. If it were not for the urgency of the situation, this old man who has experienced countless years would not be so anxious. Yet at the moment, Caliban's afterglow glimpsed the movement of the car, and he turned his head to see that the trunk was open. Fuck. He removed the sunglasses on his face to reveal cloudy eyes, walked over carefully, picked up a rubber toy ball in the trunk, and placed it in front of his eyes. There was an unfamiliar smell on it, and it was someone he knew. Albinism Mutant immediately realized that something was wrong and hurriedly shouted at Logan in the house, "Hey! Logan! Come here! Finish talking!" He picked up the canvas bag in the trunk, and a sense of foreboding rose in his heart. "What for?" Logan heard raw shout equals out of the house, and as soon as he pushed open the door, he saw the open trunk and the objects that Caliban was holding. The pace was slightly stagnant, and he vaguely guessed something different. Caliban held up his rucksack and asked, "Whose things do these things belong to?" Logan reached out to take the toy ball, narrowed his eyes and recognized it as Laura's ball, and his heart sank. How could this thing end up in the car? At this time, the sound of engine was heard at the door of the factory building, and then a familiar SUV car came into view. "It's so fast." Logan recognized the vehicle as Donald's car, and his face suddenly solemnly said, "You go inside, hide the professor, quick." Caliban also understood that the situation was very critical, and immediately turned and walked towards the house. At the moment SUV was already parked in front of the factory building. Donald opened the door and walked out, the corners of his mouth outlined a meaningful arc. "Go back. This is private territory." Logan's face was unkind, and his gloomy eyes were like an elderly wolf protecting the territory, and he roared, "Yes, that's right, but I don't think it's yours." Donald looked around calmly and disapprovingly, as if there was no threat from the other side. When Logan heard this, his face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. "I think you've already met her, it's a shame you didn't call me." Donald shook his head slightly and said to himself, "I haven't met the man you mentioned." Logan turned his head sideways to meet Donald's gaze, his fierce eyes meeting it. "You definitely met its owner." Donald smiled and reached out in the air, pointing to the toy ball in Logan's hand. Yet at this very moment, a steel pipe flew through the air and struck sharply, carrying huge amounts of force to directly knock him out of gravity, and the petite figure standing at the place where the steel pipe was thrown. Logan's pupils contracted, and he saw a little girl in red looking at him with a stubborn face. "It's Laura I just saw last night." He was just about to walk over with a black face and teach him a lesson about the girl who had caused him trouble. Charles sat in an electric wheelchair and stepped out to block the way. "Don't scare the little one, she's the mutant I often mention to you." "What?" Logan couldn't help but feel a burst of consternation. "Come with me, it's safe here, no one will hurt you." Charles waved to Laura thoughtfully, and the little girl hesitated before nodding and following. Before leaving, he forcefully snatched the toy ball from Logan's hand. Logan looked at the two people who walked into the house one after another, and was also a little helpless, and complained in a low voice, "Forget it, whatever you want." Then he beckoned to Caliban and gestured, "This is someone from the Akali Genetically Modified Institute, and you drove him over to the waddy bed." Caliban suddenly panicked, looked at the person on the ground, and asked, "What if he wakes up halfway?" Logan glanced at him, leaned down and took a pistol from Donald's waist and handed it to Caliban's hand. "Look at it." Caliban looked at the cold gun in his hand, and then at Donald on the ground, looking a little dazed. The other side. Endless was staying in the convenience store, yawning boredly, and there were no customers in the desert at this time in the past. Suddenly there were several harsh brake sounds outside the store, which attracted his attention and turned to look, and through the glass he saw several SUV cars parked outside the door. A group of burly strong men walked down, their eyes revealing the murderous goon arm held at the waist with one hand, and rushed straight into the convenience store. "Buy what?" Endless squinted slightly. Obviously these people did not come to shop at all. Sure enough, in the next second, without saying a word, this group of big men directly forcibly suppressed the teenager at the front desk, and his strong arms held him dead and dragged him out. Endless wanted to resist, but reacted instantly. It seems that the people of the AKLIGMO Institute have discovered that Wolverine has taken Laura. Everything is developing according to the original plot. However, he is the only exception. Since he planned to meddle in Wolverine's originally miserable fate, there was nothing wrong with going with this group of people. Besides, he also has to pick up Professor X's psychic ability. Thinking of this, Endless slowly stopped his hand movements and got into the car under their pushing. However, this trip is not comfortable. Upon arriving at his destination, as Endless expected, Donald did not die and captured Caliban. Caliban felt the coolness coming from his temples, and his heart was even more cold. His nose wrinkled slightly, smelling a hint of the same kind, and his gaze fell on a yellow-skinned teenager. It was the smell of Mutant. So Caliban, as if grasping at a life-saving straw, couldn't wait to atone for his sins, shouting, "He's a mutant." These words naturally fell into Endless' ears, and his eyes narrowed slightly when he heard it, exuding a trace of coldness. The opposite is true. After Donald heard such news, he was stunned for a moment, and immediately laughed. His eyes glanced at Endless playfully, and his tone was full of playfulness. "No wonder you can talk to that old trash." He pouted, his expression showing complete disdain, his eyes as if he was looking at a pile of garbage. "You look young. It seems that the government department is still negligent, and can actually let these freaks breed." Hearing this, danger flashed under Endless' eyes. He remembered that Donald ended up dying badly, but this time it had to die at his hands. "Ha! The eyes are good, but let's look at your embarrassed appearance." Donald didn't care about the unkindness in the other party's eyes, and sneered extremely rampantly. He turned the cold pistol in his hand, and the muzzle of the black hole was suddenly aimed at Endless. "I hope your friend can be obedient for a while, otherwise there will be a big hole in your brain." On the endless desert, an SUV black car drove mightily on the dust, raising endless dust and fog everywhere it went, and looking at the rolling yellow sand on the open land. The cabin of the escort car in the middle of the convoy was dimly lit, and armed Special Forces soldiers sat next to the iron gate. Caliban curled up in a corner, his body trembling uncontrollably slightly, making noises with heavy chains around his hands and feet, apparently frightening him by what had just happened. On the contrary, Endless sat calmly next to him with an indifferent expression, without showing the slightest panic. For him, everything that happened was under control, and with the current super self-healing factor, these guys were not to be afraid. Thinking, he adjusted his posture to make himself as comfortable as possible, but there was still a vicious battle to be fought. "What is your relationship with Wolverine?" Endless glanced at the thin albino mutant in the corner of his eye. He didn't have a good feeling for the first time he met Caliban, this guy could betray him just now. However, it is difficult for mutant to survive in this world, let alone sell an unknown person and do anything to survive. Hearing this, Caliban looked up at him in surprise. Then, he had long carved caution into his bones, and chose to keep silent about the unfamiliar teenager in front of him. It seems that you don't want to say it. Seeing that he was silent, Endless didn't bother to ask any more. Anyway, with the memory of his past life, he naturally understands the identity of Caliban, who is one of the members of the mutant wanderer team Morlock. Has the ability to perceive the presence of other mutants within a 20-mile radius. In the comics, he joins the X-Men team. In the cinematic universe, Wolverine turned to Caliban a year ago to help him take care of Charles, but his personality was too cowardly and easy to give in. It also led to his later use by Donald and the GMO Institute. In silence. The convoy of the AKLI GMO Institute is about to enter the dilapidated factory where Logan and others live. The moment the mighty convoy appeared, the sky was filled with yellow sand, and the earth seemed to be shaking. In the SUV at the front, Donald in the main driver's seat gradually approached the factory building. The corners of his mouth outlined a curve, picked up the walkie-talkie on the car, and said in a deep voice, "Start moving." The brigade received the order and rushed into the factory area with great horsepower. Meanwhile, the elderly Logan Hawlett piloted Chrysler and planned to flee the place with Charles, but it was too late. The plant is surrounded by jeeps coming from all directions, and all roads are blocked by convoys from the AKLI Institute of Genetics. Fuck. Logan Hawlett slammed the steering wheel angrily and cursed the backward car. Charles, who was sitting in the back seat, looked around, fell into the chaotic scene, and said softly, "Logan. I'm figuring it out." Wolverine gasped, her eyebrows revealing a solemn and simple response. "Logan, we can't give up on that girl." Charles chattered and looked in the direction of the factory building from time to time. "Please stop talking." Logan was a little irritable. He really wasn't in the mood to pay attention to the others, he just wanted to get out of this place quickly. Inside the carriage of the escort car, Endless and Caliban both heard movement outside, and the violent shaking caused by the sudden stop of the vehicle also made their bodies sway. "It's over, we're all finished." Caliban, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke, his eyes full of despair. He knew what would happen if he was caught by the AKLI GMO Institute. Those damned white coat personnel would dissect them, and no one would survive inside the institute. Endless acted extremely calm, leaning leisurely in his chair as if the person being arrested was not him. "Your friends Wolverine will be with you soon." Donald glanced in the rearview mirror, his gaze fell on Endless' eyes flashed with anger, and sneered. After that, he pushed open the door and walked straight towards the black Chrysler, standing beside the car with his fingers slowly running through the window, and his knuckles tapped on the back seat window. Knock knock. Charles Xavier, the octogenarian that the national government wants to arrest the most. Donald looked at Charles in the back seat with a smile, his slightly muffled voice rich in a native Texas accent and sounding threatening. Logan in the main driver's seat pushed the door down in black and asked him, "Where is Caliban?" "I advise you to calm down." Donald paced in front of the car and spared half a circle to Logan. "Why don't you tell me where the girl is first, or I'll ask the old man." Then he pointed to Charles in the car and chuckled, "He looks much friendlier than you." "I told you, she's not here." Logan took a deep breath, his chest heaving violently, suppressing the anger in his heart. "Tell me, where is Caliban?" "I threw him into the dry ditch prepared for me." When Donald heard this, he pouted and looked disapproving, and then looked at the escort car not far away. "But I have a better one for you." The voice just fell. In the escort car, Endless was violently pushed out, and with his limbs restrained, he stumbled under his feet and almost fell to the ground. Seeing this, Wolverine's pupils suddenly contracted, and the blue tendons on his forehead burst out, and the next second he slammed into the collar of the former owner Donald, and the steel claws instantly stretched out from his fists, glaring at the indifferent man in front of him. "Don't hurt him. You'll pay for it." However, the special agents next to him immediately reacted, grabbing Wolverine's arms, slamming him against the door and holding it deadly. "Ah!" Logan howled angrily and launched a fierce resistance. It's just that Wolverine gradually entered the twilight of his physical function and suffered a sharp decline, and he was out of breath against a few ordinary punks, not to mention that the enemies he faced were professionally trained special forces. Moreover, he was seriously injured the night before yesterday, and now he can't exert strength at all. After the special forces punched and kicked, Logan fell to the ground in pain. The surrounding special forces armed with firearms swarmed up and aimed their dark and cold muzzles at Wolverine on the ground. Donald condescendingly looked down at the elderly man on the ground and pretended to regret. "Wolverine, my heart is broken when I see your miserable condition." He continued, "And you have killed an innocent young man. I am afraid he will have to go to jail with you." After speaking, his playful eyes looked at Endless again. Endless' expression was indifferent, and his cold gaze like frost greeted him, and he said indifferently, "I'll dig out your heart later to see if it is broken." Words fall. A cold voice suddenly sounded in his head, "Battle detected, drop reward, super strength, Wolverine." Suddenly, he only felt that his whole body was filled with strength, his thin muscles instantly bulged, and his bones made a slight abnormal sound. Inside the trunk of the escort car, Caliban looked at Endless outside in disbelief through the small window. He smelled a familiar breath on the yellow-skinned boy. "It's kind of like Wolverine." Obviously not just now. How did it suddenly have it after a while? When in doubt. The next scene shocked him deeply. I saw Endless, who was originally bound by this chain, suddenly roared with both fists, "Get out!" Bang! Then the heavy iron chains crumbled and the chains under the feet broke abruptly. Before anyone could react, Endless violently ripped off the dagger from the waist of the nearest person and raised his hand towards the man's neck. Raw! The cold blade cut through the skin, and as a line of blood emerged, a scarlet column of blood spilled into the air, staining the ground in an instant. Neck, chest, abdomen. Endless is not picky and regards all the vital aspects of the human body as his own target. There is only one goal, that is, to kill people in the shortest time. With his ghostly body and Wolverine's super strength when he was young, he quickly set off a bloody storm. Between the electric light and stone fire, several people have fallen to the ground, and the stumps and broken arms and internal organs are scattered on the ground. Dark red blood continued to flow, dyeing the ground made of sand a dark red. The air is filled with a strong fishy smell, and even a strong sandstorm lingers. The battle is still going on, and blood is gushing constantly. The bodies of several guards soon fell next to the escort car, lying on the ground horizontally, with very hideous faces. They are powerless in the face of unexpected situations, and Endless, who has super strength, is simply like a vicious wolf, brutally cutting off their heads, reaping one life after another. A headless corpse fell on the ground, and their eyes widened and they were dead. Raw! At the moment Endless pulled the dagger out of a still warm body, raised his hand, and shook off the blood beads on the blade, and the inevitable injuries on his body were also healing rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then he looked at the last guard with a cold gaze. Shit. Damn freak. The guard's heart trembled, and he quickly picked up the gun and pulled the trigger. Bang bang. The shuttle bullet streaked through the air and spun towards Endless. Seeing this, a cold light flashed under his eyes, and his feet stomped sharply, leaving 2 deep pits in the sand, like a murderous wolf rushing straight towards the guards. This guy. Chrysler. Charles looked up at Endless, slightly startled, always felt that the posture was very familiar. At the moment. Next second. Endless braved the indiscriminate rain of bullets, piercing the guard's neck and cutting off hard bones, and blood splattered from his throat. A human head with a distorted face fell to the ground. Bang! Endless looked at the fallen corpse and raised his hand to wipe a handful of blood all over his face. His clothes had long been soaked in blood, sticky to his skin, making people feel very uncomfortable. However, Endless didn't care, just looked at the corpses and smiled disdainfully. Wolverine's super strength is far beyond his imagination. He thought it was just the peak level of humanity, but now he looks at it without losing to Captain America. Even stronger. Hell, damn little beast, I really should have killed you in advance. Donald, who was not far away, had a fierce look in his eyes and gritted his teeth. I thought that everything was under control, but I was actually broken by a little furry boy at the cashier of a convenience store. Logan, who was pressed to the ground by a group of special forces, raised his head with difficulty, and the anxious emotion in his eyes had long been replaced by shock. In a trance, Logan seemed to be able to see his younger self from the yellow-skinned teenager's body. Cold, brutal, straightforward. If you don't move, you will seal. Taking someone's life without saying a word, even the way of fighting is similar. And inside the Chrysler, Charles, who was sitting in the back seat, seemed to notice something. In the originally dumbfounded gaze, a trace of clarity gradually recovered, and a hint of disbelief was revealed. At some point, he seemed to feel an incredible ability from the other person. At this time, Logan, who was suppressed by several people, suddenly came to his senses, let out a roar from his mouth, and launched a counterattack not to be outdone. The elderly body burst out with a power that did not belong to this age, and directly overturned several people around him. Logan tumbled, and his sharp steel claws streaked through the air in an icy arc, straight through the chest of a special soldier. It wasn't until at the moment that the old wolf finally revealed his slightly loose but still unched fangs. The battle is completely on. Between the electric light and stone fire, Logan unleashed a few more claws, each time taking away a life. Quick! Shoot them! Donald stepped back in horror and said that it was all a lie to say that he was not panicking. Just kidding, this old guy is the mutant he admires the most. Perhaps Wolverine's story will fade into oblivion over time, but Donald remembers it clearly. Even if Wolverine is old, the strength of forcing is not comparable to ordinary people. At the moment, Logan has set off a bloody storm, and everyone in sight has been killed. The blood in the sight, the fishy smell in the nasal cavity, and the touch from the steel claws. All this makes Logan feel as if his younger self is back. The other side. Endless is also painting a picture from hell with sword light and blood, and the sound of gunfire and screams is mixed and echoes above the factory area, which seems both tragic and terrible. Under the union of one old and one young, the special forces are not opponents at all, and the armament of the whole body is as fragile as paper. A moment later, There were already a large number of corpses on the ground, and dark red blood permeated a large area of the ground, appearing cloudy and dirty, and emitting a disgusting fishy smell. Shit! Donald looked at the purgatory-like scene, and immediately took a few of his men to protect himself, preparing to escape from this place of right and wrong. Just as he turned around, the door of the dilapidated factory building was pushed open, and a petite figure came out of it. After seeing the comer clearly, Donald's heart was cold. This is Mission Target X-24, also known as Laura. Laura, go away. Logan saw Laura coming out, and he hurried to this side as fast as he could. However, Laura, who heard Raw's shout, was unmoved, staring at Donald and the others with a pair of eyes, without the innocence of this age. Instead, it exudes a strong, killing intent. Next second, Laura leaned down, landed on all fours, kicked her legs sharply, and threw herself at Donald and the others. In the face of Laura's sudden outburst, the armed personnel at the forefront of the team did not have time to react at all and were directly thrown to the ground. Scold. A metallic vibration characteristic of a hum sounded, and steel claws very similar to Logan's poked out of Laura's immature fist. Laura's eyes were full of fierceness, and she raised her hand and directly cut off the neck of the person under her with a wave of her hand. The head rolled to the ground, and warm blood spilled on her tender face, slowly sliding down. What? Logan's rushing pace was sudden, and his heart shook. How could this girl be so similar to herself? Damn, don't be stunned. Shoot quickly. Donald yelled as he stepped back. But before everyone could react, Laura pounced on the person on her side again, her slender arms waved, and another living life became cold in her hands. Laura, who has been cultivated as a killing machine since she was a child, shows an extremely murderous scene at this moment. A gunshot burst through the sky. Immediately after, endless gunfire burst out. Laura's petite and flexible body moves through everyone. Even if she is hit by a bullet, she can quickly get up, the wound gradually heals, and she launches a more violent attack under the stimulation of pain. After only a moment's effort, the rest of the special forces fell in a pool of blood. In the end, only Donald was left. Pierce alone. He staggered and slowly retreated to the side of the Chrysler car. It looks like someone is in danger. Endless' eyes narrowed slightly, and he walked towards him with a dagger in his hand. He didn't have much affection for this guy, either in film or reality. At the same time, Logan and Laura also gathered around, their eyes full of resentment. Hey, guys, calm down, we have something to discuss. Donald looked at the three eyes full of murderous intent and swallowed his spit with difficulty. Actually, we can solve the problem in another way. Killing me will not benefit any of you. Donald felt the killing intent in the eyes of the three people, and quickly raised his hand to beg for mercy. Raw. However, the petite figure walking in front suddenly waved his steel claws and flashed coldly, cutting off his mechanical arm as if cutting paper. Hey! Donald leaned back in a slight panic. Don't make a mess with the children. Endless leaned over and pulled the girl to him, smiled at the elder's tone and said, "Put your paws away." Laura frowned unhappily, trying to break free, but found that the big hand was like an iron pincer that did not move. Although she is the product of the Institute's use of Wolverine Logan's genes, she has undergone cruel and abusive training since childhood. But because he is still young, there is still a big gap in his own strength compared to Wolverine at his peak. But Endless's current strength is the same as the peak Wolverine, and naturally much stronger than Laura. In the end, he could only purse his mouth and put away the steel claws. Wolverine, your daughter is very good," Endless quipped, looking at Wolverine. "Endless, she's not my daughter. You hurry to the car." Wolverine looked at the girl with a bit of a headache, opened the door and pushed her into the back seat. "Well, it's time to deal with this damn guy." When Endless' gaze fell on Donald, the warmth in his eyes had dissipated, replaced by a winter-like chill. "You come to me." Logan roughly tugged at Conrad by the collar, dragged him behind him, and walked towards the factory building. He wanted to find out the purpose of this group of people to arrest Laura. After all, what kind of person would do something to a 13 or 14-year-old girl? "Calm down. Calm down. Wolverine, it's no good for you to kill me. People from the Genetic Research Institute will come to you. Let me go, I can tell you the truth." As the surrounding light became dim, Conrad's heart gradually sank, knowing that if he didn't ask for mercy, he would definitely die in this place. "Tell me." Logan stopped, his arm slamming it against the wall. The steel claw of the other hand has already reached out, flashing with a cold light in the dim light, and it can kill the other party at any time. The tip of the claw that sharpened iron like mud had already caused a line of blood to appear on Donald's neck. "You'd better tell the truth, otherwise." Logan's tone was low, and the tips of his claws were a little deeper. "As long as you tell the truth, we promise not to kill you." Endless looked at him and said coldly. He definitely didn't want Donald to let Donald go, but wanted Wolverine to hear the truth. And although he knew the truth in advance, if he said it, it would make people suspicious. "I say." When Donald heard this, it seemed like he had grabbed a life-saving straw. Even if you know that the other person is very likely to be unconvinced, there is no other way now. Actually, Laura was bred with genes. Hearing this, Wolverine's pupils trembled slightly, and the other party also looked at him, and said slowly, "Using your genes." "Hear the answer." Logan Howlett was not surprised. He saw many familiar shadows in Laura, and even the appearance was somewhat similar to his youth. "It was only when I heard it with my own ears that I was confirmed in my heart. Originally, the gene company planned to raise these children to be killers, but then many people got out of control." Donald observed the look on Logan's face and continued cautiously, "So now the company intends to kill these experimental questions," and Laura was rescued by Galareth. He was a little afraid that Wolverine would kill someone. After all, Wolverine was also an experimental subject before, and he must have an extreme hatred for what the Genetic Research Institute did. Sure enough, after hearing this, the already burning anger in Logan's eyes became even stronger. "You guys." But before he could make a move, a cold light flashed in front of him. The next moment, a scarlet gushed out from Donald's neck, feeling the stickiness and warmth coming from his face, and the light of life in his eyes gradually dissipated. Eventually he fell and lost his breath. Logan turned his head in surprise to look at Endless on his side. For a moment, he glanced at Donald, who was unwilling to die, before saying, "If you want to do it next time, tell me in advance." "Wolverine, where are you going next?" Endless wiped the blood on his hands and continued, "This place is obviously no longer safe. The Genetic Research Institute will definitely send people over, and if it is not transferred, it will face an endless battle. Go find a place to rest first, and then change cars." Logan replied in a deep voice and walked towards the house. After this battle, Logan obviously also recognized this yellow-skinned teenager from a convenience store, and the other party had his former shadow. Endless raised his eyebrows slightly, and followed behind him leisurely. The two walked out of the room. The blazing sun above their heads glowed, and the strong light made their eyes narrow slightly, just in time to see Caliban, who had broken free, and was staggering out of the escort car. "Caliban, I thought you were thrown into that dry ravine." Logan's words were not nice, but they revealed joy. After several twists and turns, no one died. This is already a great blessing for an old wolf who is accustomed to seeing life and death parting. "We've got to change to a safer place," Logan said in a deep voice. "Forget it." Caliban hesitated for a moment and said rather hesitationally. This time, he no longer wanted to flee, on the contrary, it was better to return to live in the sewers, where it was safer. "Good luck." Logan saw the emotion in his eyes and nodded. "God is with you." Caliban wrapped tightly in the scorching sun, and after saying that, he turned and walked towards the factory building. After a brief goodbye, Endless and others sat on Chrysler and left this place with many unbearable memories. Vehicles gallop up with yellow sand, the world in the rearview mirror begins to become murky, and the factory buildings on the horizon gradually disappear. It didn't take long for the dilapidated factory building to welcome a burly man. If Logan were still here, he would have been shocked. Because the comer is exactly the same as when he was young. "Actually, we can solve the problem in another way. Killing me will not benefit any of you." Donald felt the killing intent in the eyes of the three people, and quickly raised his hand to beg for mercy. Raw. However, the petite figure walking in front suddenly waved his steel claws and flashed coldly, cutting off his mechanical arm as if cutting paper. "Hey!" Donald leaned back in a slight panic. "Don't make a mess with the children." Endless leaned over and pulled the girl to him, smiled at the elder's tone and said, "Put your paws away." Laura frowned unhappily, trying to break free, but found that the big hand was like an iron pincer that did not move. Although she is the product of the Institute's use of Wolverine Logan's genes, she has undergone cruel and abusive training since childhood. But because he is still young, there is still a big gap in his own strength compared to Wolverine at his peak. But Endless's current strength is the same as the peak Wolverine, and naturally much stronger than Laura. In the end, he could only purse his mouth and put away the steel claws. "Wolverine, your daughter is very good," Endless quipped, looking at Wolverine. "Endless, she's not my daughter. You hurry to the car." Wolverine looked at the girl with a bit of a headache, opened the door and pushed her into the back seat. "Well, it's time to deal with this damn guy." When Endless' gaze fell on Donald, the warmth in his eyes had dissipated, replaced by a winter-like chill. "You come to me." Logan roughly tugged at Conrad by the collar, dragged him behind him, and walked towards the factory building. He wanted to find out the purpose of this group of people to arrest Laura. After all, what kind of person would do something to a 13 or 14-year-old girl? "Calm down. Calm down. Wolverine, it's no good for you to kill me. People from the Genetic Research Institute will come to you. Let me go, I can tell you the truth." As the surrounding light became dim, Conrad's heart gradually sank, knowing that if he didn't ask for mercy, he would definitely die in this place. "Tell me." Logan stopped, his arm slamming it against the wall. The steel claw of the other hand has already reached out, flashing with a cold light in the dim light, and it can kill the other party at any time. The tip of the claw that sharpened iron like mud had already caused a line of blood to appear on Donald's neck. "You'd better tell the truth, otherwise." Logan's tone was low, and the tips of his claws were a little deeper. "As long as you tell the truth, we promise not to kill you." Endless looked at him and said coldly. He definitely didn't want Donald to let Donald go, but wanted Wolverine to hear the truth, and although he knew the truth in advance, if he said it, it would make people suspicious. I say. When Donald heard this, it seemed like he had grabbed a life-saving straw. Even if you know that the other person is very likely to be unconvinced, there is no other way now. Actually, Laura was bred with genes. Hearing this, Wolverine's pupils trembled slightly, and the other party also looked at him, and said slowly, "Using your genes." Hear the answer. Logan Howlett was not surprised. He saw many familiar shadows in Laura, and even the appearance was somewhat similar to his youth. It was only when I heard it with my own ears that I was confirmed in my heart. Originally, the gene company planned to raise these children to be killers, but then many people got out of control. Donald observed the look on Logan's face and continued cautiously, "So now the company intends to kill these experimental questions," and Laura was rescued by Galarath. He was a little afraid that Wolverine would kill someone. After all, Wolverine was also an experimental subject before, and he must have an extreme hatred for what the Genetic Research Institute did. Sure enough, after hearing this, the already burning anger in Logan's eyes became even stronger. "You guys." But before he could make a move, a cold light flashed in front of him. The next moment, a scarlet gushed out from Donald's neck, feeling the stickiness and warmth coming from his face, and the light of life in his eyes gradually dissipated. Eventually he fell and lost his breath. Logan turned his head in surprise to look at Endless on his side. For a moment, he glanced at Donald, who was unwilling to die, before saying, "If you want to do it next time, tell me in advance." "Wolverine, where are you going next?" Endless wiped the blood on his hands and continued, "This place is obviously no longer safe. The Genetic Research Institute will definitely send people over, and if it is not transferred, it will face an endless battle. Go find a place to rest first, and then change cars." Logan replied in a deep voice and walked towards the house. After this battle, Logan obviously also recognized this yellow-skinned teenager from a convenience store, and the other party had his former shadow. Endless raised his eyebrows slightly, and followed behind him leisurely. The two walked out of the room. The blazing sun above their heads glowed, and the strong light made their eyes narrow slightly, just in time to see Caliban, who had broken free, and was staggering out of the escort car. "Caliban, I thought you were thrown into that dry ravine." Logan's words were not nice, but they revealed joy. After several twists and turns, no one died. This is already a great blessing for an old wolf who is accustomed to seeing life and death parting. "We've got to change to a safer place," Logan said in a deep voice. "Forget it." Caliban hesitated for a moment and said rather hesitationally. This time, he no longer wanted to flee. On the contrary, it was better to return to live in the sewers, where it was safer. "Good luck." Logan saw the emotion in his eyes and nodded. "God is with you." Caliban wrapped tightly in the scorching sun, and after saying that, he turned and walked towards the factory building. After a brief goodbye, Endless and others sat on Chrysler and left this place with many unbearable memories. Vehicles gallop up with yellow sand, the world in the rearview mirror begins to become murky, and the factory buildings on the horizon gradually disappear. It didn't take long for the dilapidated factory building to welcome a burly man. If Logan were still here, he would have been shocked. Because the comer is exactly the same as when he was young. Charles' bedroom. The afternoon sun shines through the glass on the floor, making the room feel warm. Duh. Logan. Charles, who was resting on the soft bed, heard a slight movement from the side of the bed and slowly opened his eyes. Ha! Logan stopped pouring water and moved his gaze from the glass to the professor's old face. Charles, who received a response, smiled reassuringly, and then said, "Your friend Endless, he is special. What's wrong with him?" Hearing this, Logan Hawley was puzzled. He still trusted Endless, who helped in a critical moment. Thought for a moment. Charles' tone was indescribable. He has an indescribable strangeness. In your current state, I'm afraid everyone will feel that there is a problem. Logan frowned and reluctantly handed the glass to Charles. No more. Charles shook his head and didn't answer the water. His eyes looked through the door, and a large and small figure in the living room sat on the sofa watching TV, and he had a strong premonition in his heart. This feeling does not originate from Laura, but from Endless. It was an ethereal, indescribable feeling, and he always felt that the other party could bring some kind of surprise, or could create some miracle. And when Endless was outside the factory today, the moment Endless broke free from the chains, Charles suddenly felt a breath that belonged to Wolverine. But unlike Laura, Endless is a natural mutant, and it is impossible to contain other mutant genes. Charles was silent, his eyes showing a depth that only appears when he is in a good state of mind. He was deeply puzzled, but he did not detect malice in the yellow-skinned boy. On the contrary, the other party is like the students in the former Xavier Genius Youth Academy, vaguely showing care and respect for themselves, and the eyebrows are also revealed. That's why Charles didn't mention it to Logan, intending to observe it for a while. Charles, who can read other people's minds, knows better than anyone that anyone has secrets and needs them. Since the other party has no malicious intentions, there is no need to dig into the bottom line. I'll have to go out and fix the problem with the car, and I'll be back soon. You remember to take your medicine on time. At this time, Logan habitually put the water cup on the bedside table and took out a small medicine bottle from his arms. Charles smiled and waved his hand, signaling that Logan didn't have to worry about himself. Without Caliban's help, taking care of Charles did become a troublesome task, and Rogue was afraid that something would happen to them in his absence. This old and young, one with limited mobility, and the other still young. If you are raided, you will not be directly served by a pot, so you must leave this place as soon as possible. With a thick worry, Logan suddenly quickened his steps, walked into the living room, and beckoned to Endless, who was doing nothing. Endless, I plan to change the car, you come with me. Happy to help. Endless immediately got up from the sofa and followed Logan towards the door. A second-hand sale site built under a bridge, with lots of vehicles filling the empty land. Logan drove in as Chrysler, riddled with bullet holes, and the two got out of the car, handed the keys to the man next to them, and walked deeper. Endless looked around and found that they were all vehicles of different models, messily placed under the bridge, just enough to take advantage of this to avoid the rain. Due to the small number of guests, it is extremely deserted. In the end, Logan, with his experience, bought a large pickup truck that looked 80% new for a very small price. Originally, the money was to prepare for the purchase of the daily number, but now the situation is urgent, and he has no other way. Fortunately, the trip was uneventful, and a moment later the two got into the newly purchased large pickup truck and drove towards the hotel with the slight roar of the engine. Vehicles are driving on the road, with vehicles coming and going on both sides. What's your variant ability? Regeneration. Logan looked at Endless in the passenger seat, remembering what the professor had said to him earlier, and how little he knew about him. With small water control, you can survive underwater in a short time. Speaking of which, Endless didn't say much. After all, it is impossible to tell outsiders at will if he can pick up other people's abilities. Even if it's Wolverine. This ability should be much more comfortable than us if we live at sea. Logan didn't ask any more, just followed Endless's words. While the two chatted, the car quickly drove to the front of the hotel. Groups of people came and went in and out of the door, obviously inconvenient to park, so Logan had to step on the accelerator under his feet and drive forward. At this time, Endless frowned, found a vehicle of the Genetic Research Institute parked on the street, and quickly reminded Wolverine, "Look over there." "Shit. Let's go." Logan looked in the direction Endless was pointing, his pupils shrank sharply, and he immediately realized that the professor and Laura were in danger, and pushed the car door and ran towards the hotel. And Endless also hurriedly ran out of the car, followed Logan, and cursed fiercely in his mouth, "These damn flies are really fast." Just as the two of them stepped into the hotel door, a violent spiritual fluctuation instantly swept through the entire hotel. Suddenly, Endless felt a trance, and the rushing pace under his feet faltered, almost falling to the ground. Immediately after, a sharp pain came from his head, forcing Endless to lose control of his body in an instant, and could only grit his teeth and squeeze out two words, "Damn." Charles. Logan on the side was also hideous-faced, and his erection neck burst out of his blue muscles, and he whispered in a difficult tone. Even so, Logan still took a step with tenacious will and staggered forward. The people in the lobby of the hotel were all affected by this spiritual fluctuation, and many of them fell to their knees, and even twitched incessantly, as if it was a sign of impending death. Endless stared at his bloodshot eyes, looking at the old but firm back in front of him, and also wanted to take a step under his feet, but he felt extremely difficult. Just when everyone was in great pain, Endless's heart suddenly rejoiced, because he remembered a cold voice in his mind. Battle detected, drop reward, psychic ability, Professor X. That's it guys, hope you like this video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.